He's one of the activists around the country for faith and justice I most respect. And on this issue, I have a warm spot for him because Noel's the one who got me involved in the issue of immigration. How many years ago? You came by the office several years ago. 5 years ago, on a mission. He said, it's an issue we at Sojourners hadn't taken up at all, really. Some articles here and there, but he said, I think this is going to be one of the key issues for America's future, and we need your help, partnership, involvement, and I always listen to Noel, and so we got involved. Now it's one of our core campaigns, and he's right. He predicted this was going to be a key issue. It's not just for the people who are stuck and who are here. It's for us as a nation, how we define ourselves and how we define our future going forward. So we're very blessed and lucky to have him here today. And so I will invite him to come, and he's just been on the road talking about this in diverse places like Alabama and Georgia and on the border of Texas and Mexico. So he has a lot to say. I hope you listen carefully, and he'll lecture to us, and then we'll have a conversation with Noel, and then we'll get into your reflection paper. So it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, and on this issue, one of the best spokespeople we have, Noel Castellanos. He's also the head of the CEO of the Christian Community Development Association, CCDA, conference in 2 weeks, where I'll be, and half our staff's going to be at your conference, CCDA, 3,000 people from how many organizations across the country?
Oh, a couple thousand.
Yeah, 3,000 people there. And the Christian Community Development Association is, I think, one of the premier, on-the-ground faith and justice networks in the whole country. So he's the CEO, he's the leader of that organization and movement. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Noel Castellanos.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I saw the reading assignments that you all had for this week, and so I want to jump in and just tell you a little bit about myself, and then tackle maybe a couple of the issues that were brought up that I think will be a good framework for our conversation today. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am, depending on how you want to frame this, I'm at least a third generation Mexican American. As far as I know, my grandparents have been in the United States for they came many years ago when I was when I was born, and as I was growing up, my grandparents and every one of their brothers and sisters were already living in Texas. My parents were born in a little border town called Weslaco, Texas, right next to Brownsville, McAllen, down in the valley. One of my grandmothers was also born there, okay? And then I was born there in that little town and grew up. My parents were migrant workers along with all of their brothers and sisters. 18 children on my mom's side and 12 on my dad's side. So I am probably related to almost every Mexican American in Texas, almost. It's a good chance. And so we have a big family there. But I think the important thing I want to emphasize as I tell my story is that we've been here a long, long time. And back then, some of the earliest memories I have is walking across the border very freely. We would just go and buy groceries or buy spices or whatever, but it was a regular thing to have people coming and going between the U.S. and Mexico. And so at a certain point, my parents, who were U.S. citizens, but they lived in a part of the country where there was still a lot of poverty, a lot of racial segregation. Pretty much education was a thing that was not easy to come by in our community because of the farm worker reality. So my mother finished high school, but my dad only got to 6th grade. And then when I was about 7 or 8 years old, came into, I guess the other thing that's important is my first language was Spanish, even though I was a U.S. citizen. And by the time I entered school, began this acculturation or assimilation process where, as soon as you walk into class, your name when you walk in is Noel Castellanos. And when you leave that first day of kindergarten, it's Noel Castellanos, okay? So that's been the immigrant kind of story. But again, we were born here, okay? We were born here. So it wasn't that we came here from anywhere. We were actually born here, but yet we were part of this heritage. And when I was about 7 or 8, my parents moved to California, and along with our family. And my dad got a job at General Motors. Back in the day when working at an auto place was a pretty good job. And so for 25 years, he entered that work space, and he was on the assembly line. And we kind of began to live what many would term the American dream, okay, in the sense of stable job. We were able to buy a house. It was a little tiny house, but it was in California, okay? So after 20 years, that house, during the peak of the housing boom, it came to be worth $800,000 for a little bit, okay? It's not worth that much anymore. So that was kind of our story. But here's the thing that as I reflect about that, and it's easy to do that today because I was just there in the valley about a week ago. And I went to the little house where my grandmother used to live and where my parents would leave me when they went around picking cotton and tomatoes and cucumbers and cutting, crops all over the country. It looked pretty much the same today as it did when my grandparents were alive back then. And so that whole reality was one of, even though we were here in the United States, it was clearly still kind of a marginalized and a very separate kind of experience. And as we came to California, I ended up doing what most immigrant kids do, okay, or folks from an immigrant background. By the time I got to high school, I didn't speak Spanish anymore, okay? I just had not really thought that was that important, even though when I came home every day from school, mi mamá y mi papá me hablaban en español. They would speak to me in Spanish, but I would respond back to them in English. That's very typical, right? And then I went away to a college, a little Christian liberal arts college in Spokane, Washington, and got an education, got a college education, and pretty much at that point I was kind of free to do whatever. And I think my parents had hoped that I would do something useful with my life, even though they knew that may not happen. I was an art major in college, okay? And it's interesting how we all kind of have to live this full circle. My daughter, who's a freshman in college today, is also an art major, so I can't say much to her, okay, about her choice of careers. And but during that whole deal, it was at a point where I could say, you know what, I'm just going to be grateful for my background. I was, pretty proud to be Mexican American, but it was just kind of, what it was, and I had a good education. A couple things happened to me, and that I think is important as I tell the rest of the story related to why I'm involved in this immigration issue, and then some of the things that we face today. For me, it was a very dramatic and strong religious experience, a conversion to a faith in Jesus Christ that got me to say, man, what am I going to really do with my life? And one of the things that I remember hearing that made me very open to this personality, okay, was the idea that Christ came to affirm the dignity of every human being on this planet. And that he actually came to do that by laying down his life so that we might enter into a relationship with God through his death on the cross. Okay, you all have, that's the Christian story. Well, for me, what that meant is that, boy, if God did that for me, then I have a great responsibility. I've got to use my life for something good. So what that meant for me is that I made a very conscious choice to say, I'm not going to go and just kind of go out there and try to be rich and make all kinds of money and do whatever I want to do. I felt a call to go back and work in the Hispanic community. Okay, so that was a turning point for me. Right out of college, I went to the Mission District of San Francisco, began to work with Central American immigrants, who many of them were coming from El Salvador fleeing the war, and that was a whole new experience for me. Because again, I grew up here, I was a U.S. citizen and dealing with that reality. And then I moved into a Mexican community or barrio in San Jose not too long after that, where Cesar Chavez was organizing farm workers and beginning to bring to the national stage the plight of the migrant worker in this country. All these folks that were responsible for putting food on the plates of most Americans, but yet because of pesticides, because of low wages and all of that, and because of lack of organization, all of a sudden here comes this very humble yet powerful leader who begins to create a union and begins organizing. Well, I lived in this little neighborhood where Cesar Chavez lived called Sal Si Puedes. Okay, Get Out If You Can is the name of the neighborhood. And for me, it was, I'm going to live there among the people and get to know them, begin to build relationships with them and friendships with them. And then because of my own particular mission, it was, I'm going to help them grow closer to God. But very quickly, I realized that that process took me way beyond the idea of just getting them into a church or getting them into a Bible study or feeling satisfied thinking that my goal is really just to get people to ascend to a certain way of belief, okay? For me, when I was in the middle of that human suffering, which was not far away from my own reality, I said, man, there's something not right here. Kids are not graduating from high school. Parents don't have adequate jobs. We're living in these barrios, these communities where the police are not responding. They don't come. Gang violence everywhere. So all of that was kind of my, my next step into trying to live out this faith. And then 21 years ago, my family and I, wife and 2 children at that point, we moved into a Mexican community in Chicago called Little Village or La Villita. And again, the call was, we feel like we can go there and just live there among the people and really see if we can serve to be a catalyst where folks can really learn to not only love God, but to also understand how valuable they are, okay? As immigrants in this country, this neighborhood, about 100% almost Mexican descent. And here's what I found out, and this is what launches us into this immigration talk, is that while I was there loving and helping people, my goal was to educate their kids, making sure that folks were able to buy homes because that creates stability in the community. While we were working on starting health clinics and youth programs and job kind of incubation opportunities, over and over and over and over again, I heard, you know what, I can't do that because I'm here illegally. I don't have my papers. I don't have my documents. And I thought, well, let's just go get them, And I think that's one of the big myths that I think many people are surprised at as we enter into this discussion, is that for mostly unskilled workers that come to this country who flee not just Latin America, although the perception is that all undocumented immigrants are from Mexico, But while the majority come from Latin America because of its close proximity, it's Asia and it's Russia. In Chicago, where I live, here's on one road, one main street. Here's what I can experience in a day. I can be at Home Depot in my neighborhood, and there's a bunch of day laborers, most of them who are undocumented, right, waiting for somebody to come and take them to do a job where they'll pay them just a little bit of money. And if I keep going north about 7 miles, there is another little gas station there, and the same thing is going on, but it's Russian and Polish and Czech immigrants that are there doing the same thing that you never hear about at all. Chicago is one of the most diverse ethnic cities in the country, and we have undocumented immigrants from most places in the world in that country. But, you know, as I kept hearing that story, I had to ask myself, well, maybe if I just work harder at being, you know, nice to these folks, I can help them solve this problem. Or maybe if I just start more programs and I'm more creative about how to do that, I'll help them solve these problems. Maybe if I get more of these kids into college and get them educated, you know, they'll come out and they'll be on their way. But on every single turn, I kept facing the same thing. Folks would say, you know what? Because of our legal status or lack thereof, we run into dead ends at every turn. And that's when I began to examine the U.S. immigration policy. And what I found is that you know, our policy is antiquated, it's broken, it has not really changed for you know, probably 50 or more years. We've had a policy that has not been revamped to take into account the new realities that we face today. Many of you know that in 1986-87, President Reagan, dealing with a very similar situation as what we have right now, many undocumented immigrants in our country, he actually passed an amnesty law that allowed people to come out of the shadows of being undocumented and actually register and become legal residents. And that, for many of them, was the pathway to then become citizens. But since 1987 till today, what we did is basically fix the problem for 3 million people back then, but did nothing to really prevent this from happening again. And so today we have, by many estimates, between 12 and 15 million undocumented individuals in the United States of America. And so what are some of the factors that are going on today? Okay, well, I think two things that you all probably could guess very quickly have greatly impacted where we are today with the prospect of changing our immigration law. Number one, during the period right before 9/11, President Bush and President Fox of Mexico were on the verge of passing some very huge, sweeping immigration reform laws. They were both friends from when they were both governors, Guanajuato in Mexico and Texas on the border. And so they'd gotten to know each other. They you know, like Perry today, seems to have a little more clue or a little more compassion, if you listen to the debate, right, towards immigrants because of being right there on the border. Well, they were on the verge of passing this big reform that was going to do a number of things that has kind of been at the heart of a lot of the immigration debate for the last 10 years at least. Okay, they were saying, we got to create a pathway to citizenship for folks that are here illegally. We know that there are a bunch of folks here, and we're going to admit that they broke the law to get into this country, so we've got to penalize them, give them, you know, make them pay a fine. Great concern about this idea of assimilation or integration. So they said we've got to make sure that they learn the Constitution, that they learn to speak English. Okay, so we got to do that. The other thing, we got to close the border, right? We got to make sure that the border's closed, and we can't have this porous border. Thirdly, we've got to create a guest worker program that takes into account the real needs of our country's labor needs and the number of immigrant visas that come. Because one of the things that you begin to find when you dig into this thing is today in our national policy, there are 10,000 visas for unskilled laborers to come into the United States besides agriculture. Okay, agriculture has a few more. But imagine, you know, out of those 15 million that are here undocumented, how many people are coming to take a job at a hotel, to be a gardener, to work, in construction, doing all this kind of work, and most of them are low-wage, unskilled jobs. Well, our policy is very inadequate for that. So, you know, we've got to figure out this this guest worker kind of approach. There's got to be some kind of way to verify, okay, whether a person is here legally or not. So now that's kind of evolved to is this E-Verify program that some people want to push right now and say that's the solution today. But you know, those are all kind of things that have been kind of brought out as essential to trying to fix our problem. And so that 9/11 situation, you know, what happened in 9/11 put the halt on that whole discussion. Because even though we had a bipartisan bill, the McCain-Kennedy bill, that was, you know, I think very strongly supported on both sides of the aisle, 9/11 comes, and all of a sudden, which one of those proposals or those focuses became the primary thing that we were going to focus on? It was close the border, right? Because obviously great fear for folks coming in who might be terrorists. And so all of a sudden, and this has been since then, the discussion whenever we talk about getting anything done on immigration reform is, well, first we've got to close the border. Well, the reality is that over this period of time, we have spent billions of dollars to work to close the border, hiring more border patrol, building more fence along those high entry areas. And also, one of the things that many people don't realize is that under the Obama administration, there's been more deportations in the last couple of years than we've had during anybody else's presidency, okay? So Obama has taken that to heart, and there is a great push towards securing the border. So one factor that I think I'll mention that it's really important as we think about some of the complexity of this issue. There was a time when migrant workers or immigrants who would come into the country, they would have a pattern of what we call circular migration, okay? They would come in to pick a crop, or they'd come in to do construction work for a season, or they would come to do some type of work, and then they would go back home, and they'd come back again when the work was available again. And all this was going on while we had on the books our current immigration policy, okay? So the policy hadn't changed. But there was a kind of a flow and a allowance and a system that we had kind of gotten into where folks were coming and going, and it was working for everybody. During that time, there was also great economic boom. Everybody was making money, and in some of the places that today are some of the harshest opponents to immigration, Georgia and Alabama and Arizona, California. It was immigrants that fueled growth in construction industries, in entertainment industries, in agriculture. So somehow all of that was going on, and when the border became tight, that migration pattern came to a halt, because now what happened? You're in the United States and you had a job and you were not going to leave. It was too difficult to leave. And I wish we had time to go into all those stories, okay? Kind of what I would call kind of the human element of what it takes to come to this country. I'll never forget, and I don't know, it doesn't really matter what side of the political aisle you'd kind of find yourself, but I'll never forget hearing President Bush, one time on TV saying, you know what, if I'm really honest, if my family was in that dire poverty that many of these families find themselves in, and I'm the father, I'm doing the same thing. I'm crossing over. There is this magnet, okay, to the north that is created by our wealth and our job opportunity, and but that all closed down. Okay, so now what you found is 15 million people trapped in this situation with really no other option but to stay here, and many of them, again, working really hard. Like in my neighborhood, they're just trying to get ahead. They're trying to make it. They're trying to raise their kids, but things have steadily become more difficult. And then the last thing I think I'd say on that is, and then our current economic crash happened, okay? And when you think about the incredible toll that that's taken on our country, all of a sudden, with the economy just falling out and recession talk and everything else, more and more, here's what you began to hear. And I would hear this everywhere I go, and I still hear it today. Like Jim said, I was just in Alabama for a few days. They just got done passing one of the harshest, it will be the harshest anti-immigration law in the country, worse than Arizona. And one of the first things that I hear as I'm there is, hey, there is no way that we're going to support any kind of immigration policy that does not get rid of these immigrants that are taking away jobs from Americans, okay? So I leave that meeting, and I travel 35 miles outside of Huntsville, Alabama, which is a mecca for high-tech and defense spending jobs, and Boeing and all kinds of other companies are there. And I go out to the little towns where most of the Hispanics live, Tyson Chicken Factory, tomato farms and all, and I began talking to people, and I talked to a few of the employers, and they say, you know what, even though the law has not come into effect yet, our folks, our workers are leaving. They're afraid. They're taking off. We don't have enough workers to finish our shifts in these poultry plants. We don't have enough workers to pick these tomatoes and these crops. Many of them are going to go bad. There are not any American workers that will take these jobs. Is there a need for work today by millions of people? Absolutely. But the one of the myths is that, you know what, these immigrants are coming in and taking jobs that if they weren't here, our folks would be working. And, it doesn't mean that there's not an impact, because I do believe there is an impact. But I think that we underestimate how true that is, that many of these jobs are jobs that nobody else is going to take. So that whole thing, is the way I would frame what's been going on over the last 20, 30 years in our immigration system today. We're in this political climate where nobody wants to take the lead. No one wants to make this a huge priority. And so we continue to have many, many families that are in a place of I would just call it limbo, okay? So, in closing, my motivation, okay, is really, I believe that the United States is a place that was created for opportunity. And I believe there's great benefit from immigrants coming to this country. But even more than that, I think what has made me become extremely passionate about being involved in this situation is that I see that as a minister of the gospel, that the idea that we would not treat people with dignity and respect, now that doesn't necessarily equate having a certain kind of immigration policy, okay? But it does say that we cannot just be at a place where we say, hey, we don't really care what happens to these families. We don't care how they got here. We don't care if we were complicit in some way in allowing these millions of people to come in as we turned our heads away from those that were coming in illegally because it was to our benefit. Now we have these families trapped in this situation, and I believe that it's going to take a great deal of just kind of a shift in paradigm, a shift in thinking, and a willingness to put the needs of some of these families ahead of politics. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but there's a great movement stirring in the Christian church today that is pushing us to begin to say we've got to really push for this kind of change. So I am just here telling you that my probably what keeps me going every day is I am out on the road. I live in a neighborhood where I see people impacted by this policy every single day, and folks are negatively impacted. And the DREAM Act is one of the topics that you read about, right? Think about that. A kid is brought here to this country, and but like me, by the time they get to high school, they don't speak any Spanish. They don't have any relatives back home anywhere where their parents came from. But now the idea is, let's send these kids out of here. Let's send them home. And I think what a waste, because to a kid that I've talked to, they've gone through high school, they're ready to go to college, many of them are ready to serve in the military and do something good for our country, but they just don't have any options. And so that's one of the very practical ways that I think that we could take a first step to say, let's address this immigration policy in this way. So, Jim, yeah.
All right. So join us here at the table. And, okay, great. So now we're going to open this up. Let me ask you a couple questions to start, and you be thinking about the questions that you'd like to ask Noel. You began your presentation and ended it with a faith statement, personal faith. As you were drawn to it because of faith. Then you went through a lot of the facts, the mythologies, the economics, demographics. You ended with faith. And then you said there's a movement stirring in the churches around us.
Yeah.
Now, one fact that you begin to see when you study this is that there's a growing unity in the faith community around this question. I would say mostly at the leadership level, at least. At the leadership level, you have a growing unity across political boundaries. Yet the nation is divided and is more polarized than ever, really, on the question. So why the disconnect between what's happening, the movement stirring in the churches of the faith community, and yet it's such a polarized issue in the country?
Yeah. I think that one of the very basic components or ingredients that's needed, I think, to move down the road is dialogue, and kind of a safe dialogue where you don't just start out by saying, well, I don't agree with you, and that's the end of the story. Now, I have no option in this personally because my wife is from Huntsville, Alabama, okay? That's why I'm there. I have family members that when we sit around the table, which we just did, some of them are Roman Catholic, some of them are evangelical. So, and there's some that are very open and compassionate, and they would probably have a very similar view than what I've articulated in terms of my own faith. But one of my brother-in-law says, "Now I'm a good one for you to talk to. I'm my wife's Italian descent, but he says I'm white, I'm Southern, I'm conservative, I'm Christian, and I have very, very little compassion for the idea that you just laid out, that we ought to be lenient on these immigrants, okay, that are here undocumented, illegally, okay? So I think, though, that as we sit around the table and begin to talk and acknowledge our common Christian faith, can we agree on the fact that as Christians we know that everybody's created in God's image? Yeah, absolutely. So as we think about these individuals, let's think about them as people first, okay? So it's not just a problem out there, it's not just a statistic, but you're talking about children and moms and dads and what that might mean. So I think that's been really helpful. Now, as a Christian, what does our faith demand in terms of as we look at an individual? Part of our mission is to help them to come to a place of faith themselves, or to reach out to people, be the good Samaritan. So I said, when you see a person in need, are you going to ask them, are you legal? Is that the first criteria? And we have a good debate about that, right? And then on the Catholic side, I say, well, the Catholic bishops have all come out in support of humane and compassionate, comprehensive immigration reform. What do you think about it? And so, if you're a good Catholic, you're going to say, I believe what the bishops believe. I believe what the church believes. That's what but as we get into it, the issue is not one of not knowing what their leadership believes, but it's never having had a conversation about this issue where they can honestly disclose some of their concerns or whatever. Man, our kids in my school, we've never had Hispanics before. Now they're coming to our school, and I'm afraid our kids' education is going to go down because they're going to have to divert energy to teach these kids ESL, and they move into our neighborhood. What's going to happen to our property values? And these are all real kind of things. And then you begin to just have that conversation, and like one of my goals when I go around traveling with Christians is just to give them a place to talk and to say, what, I'm not here to bash or to make proclamations that we can't. I have certain convictions or beliefs, but can we talk about it? I think that's one of the things that's needed, Jim.
So I'm a Christian, and I buy all this image of God stuff, and we got to treat people, and I read in Matthew 25 about the strangers and so on. But I also read Romans 12, and it's about the role of government. And isn't it true? The kids, I understand. The kids, you're just on mom and dad's back. But, is there anybody who's crossed the border who didn't know they were doing something illegal? They hadn't heard, they didn't know, they knew they were doing something illegal. So I don't like those people who don't like people because they're people of color, they're other, they're different. But there's a process, it's a legal process, and these folks didn't do that. And the rule of law, that's a value too. That's a religious value too. So how this is what we hear all the time. So what's the answer to that at the dining room table with?
Yeah, and this has come up, very quickly. And what I would say and have said to my brother-in-law is absolutely the idea that we just turn our back on laws. That's not the answer. Okay, but one of the things that I think is really important is to begin to be honest about the role that our government has played in allowing or making it possible for folks to come across the border illegally. Again, while things were going well for many, many years, we've known that we've had undocumented employees and workers in many of the industries that have been fueling our economy, and we've said, yeah, we got a problem, but everyone just kind of let it go. Now to kind of say today that's changed. It's almost like these folks just got here yesterday, and now that the issue's on the table, hey, they broke the law. Absolutely. The answer is getting them all out of here right now. Well, I think when you begin to unpack that, the complexity of that, it's difficult to just deal with it without also getting into the values of family and how we treat children and what happens with the separation and the breakdown of that. So I think to assure people, look, if we can fix the problem and then set up a set of criteria that is common sense and really goes beyond and does some things that Reagan never did or our Congress never did after the last amnesty. Yeah, we're not opposed to saying, hey, as a country, we can set limits or we can't let everybody into this country that wants to come. But let's work on a process that would deal with these folks in a way that's humane.
So if one obstacle is the traditional American resistance to the new immigrants, we had that with the Irish and the Catholics and all that. So from a Christian point of view, that's suspect. But the rule of law question is a big issue. The other is the jobs question. So, what you're saying is on the border, and certainly in the orchard I was in 2 weeks ago, and you were there too, in Eastern Washington, employers can document that they will not have enough workers for their shifts unless they have undocumented people. It's the idea that Americans would take these jobs. The data shows that isn't true. Okay, but the Dream Kids. You work with Dream Kids in Chicago, and they get to go to college, and the Dream Act would allow them to go to college and in the military, and they have an earned path to citizenship. So certainly they're gonna take some jobs, good jobs that would ultimately be perhaps jobs of legal citizens, right?
Yeah, I think one of the other realities that we face as a nation is the grain of America. That we're in the middle of this very crazy Social Security debate as well. What is it a Ponzi scheme? What is it? Are any of us, any of you around this table ever going to be able to benefit from Social Security? And I think that many economists and many think tanks and others have continually said that the influx of immigrants has always been a positive thing for America. That the Hispanic community particularly is very young compared to the rest of our country, and so that ongoing contribution to the American economic system, I think is very real. And so I do believe that, here's one of the things that is very striking to me. I travel all over the country to neighborhoods and communities that are very poor. Almost always I encounter a Hispanic community. I was just in Detroit not too long ago. Now, when you think about Detroit, it's a black city, right? It's an African-American city, about maybe between 700,000 and 800,000 people that live there. The one part of Detroit that's thriving today is an immigrant community that's taken up root south of downtown on the lake, and it is beginning to build businesses, and they're starting these little Hispanic businesses, and they're fixing up homes, and they're attracting other immigrants to come in there, and that is with the current immigration climate, right? So and I see that repeated. I was just in Indianapolis. The Hispanic population has grown from 0 to 25,000 people in the last 10 years. Tennessee, same thing. Alabama. Now, the reaction is coming at this time of economic hardship, like I mentioned, but I think it's important to say that when these folks pay taxes, even Social Security taxes right now, that doesn't go back to them, it just goes into the system. I think if they become legal citizens of the United States, you've got a community that's willing to work and has demonstrated that, and I think that's the immigrant story in our country.
All right, let me throw it over to you. Questions, comments for Noel.
So you talked about when talking about Romans 12 and 13, just talking about the role that the government has played, like in the past, in sort of implicitly permitting or encouraging people to come here. What do you think the role of the church should be to these new sort of immigration laws that are being passed in places like Alabama and Arizona? Should it be sort of a willful disobedience, or like a new sanctuary movement? Should it be sort of a accepting of it until like you can go through legal channels? What should the church's response to those new laws be?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question, and that's precisely why I was in Alabama, to talk to Christian leaders and to begin having this dialogue. One of the things that I would say that is understandable is that when the federal government fails to act and pass immigration reform, it does leave the door open for states to begin taking their own action like this, and that's the trend now that we're seeing. My goal is to like here's some of the portions of the Alabama law that came out. Okay, all right, you can't if you give somebody a job, that's a criminal offense. Okay, if somebody's here illegally, it's a criminal offense. I mean, those are the things that we've known. A child goes to enroll in school, and some of these kids were born here, right? So they are U.S. citizens, but you cannot enroll in school if the answer to the second question is were your parents born in this country? So again, here children who are born in the United States are now at the kind of subject to that type of situation. If you help an immigrant in any way, you give them a ride, you knowingly assist them in this or that. If you rent to an immigrant, okay, if you rent an apartment to somebody who's undocumented, you can also be written up. So, like, again, I'm there, I was born here and all, but all of that says to me, and this has been the fear, okay, in Arizona and many places, is the racial profiling that really will begin to happen. So it's beginning to bring up some of these issues, but then asking the church, is there any part of this law that you think we need to confront? Okay, what the Catholic Church and some of the mainline churches began to do in Arizona, they said, you know what, we're not going to stay silent when you tell me that if I see a person who's undocumented and I help them, that's illegal. We're going to do it. You know, we're going to do this as a Christian response. So in that sense, folks have already begun to say that kind of thing. Now, in Alabama, I don't think anybody's talking about sanctuary, but I think, to me, it's a question of beginning to at least have dialogue, and very few Christians are even engaged in the process of dialogue about these laws.
We were in Arizona together after the law was, or just before it was signed, I guess. And it was interesting how many, we had a press conference, and how many pastors took the microphone and said, by this law, it would be illegal for me to drive people to church who are undocumented. It's literally, now I don't think anybody's been prosecuted for that, but if the car didn't have a license plate or didn't have if its light was burnt out in the back, and a cop stops them, and then found who was in the car, you could be in violation. Or if you're serving people at a medical clinic and they're undocumented. So you had pastors get up and say they were stating their intention to do civil disobedience. They said, you should know we will not obey this law. The governor was up, she was up in her office deciding whether to sign this, and we were at the State House and right below, and of course everybody hoped she was listening, everything was said and so on. Governor, you should know, we won't. These are like pretty conservative, evangelical, black church, Hispanic pastors defying the state. What's interesting, Rob, is since from your reflections, most of you seem to agree with the point of view that's being presented here today, but I bet you that's not the case at Thanksgiving dinner. or if you ever meet people who disagree with you, like Uncle Harry, or Gambino and Uncle Gambino in your
Not
family,
quite Gambino, but
whatever.
close.
One question I always ask: what scriptures are evoked in response to any issue? I would say for a long time, Romans 12 gets evoked in response to this, while Matthew 25 didn't. Even though one of the categories of the least of these is the stranger, and by any definition, the stranger means the stranger among you who's not a citizen. So looking for what scripture is evoked helps to figure out what the context is. And back to a lot of the themes of some of your papers, reflections, the pastors who are vowing to disobey the law feel like in this case the law is wrong or being used to hurt people. And in every case, they're speaking out of what? A relationship with those migrant people, which has changed their mind about what scriptures are important and how do you approach this and all the rest, Other comments or questions? Trent. And then Adam.
I had a question about the federal political scene, and kind of looking in the past 6 months, Labor, which is a traditional Democratic constituency, has said that they want to take more of an independent course, and maybe kind of with disillusionment with Obama in the fact that a lot of their key legislation wasn't passed. And so they want to take their money maybe more independent or to federal or state levels. I also feel that's kind of a parallel to the Latino community, especially after immigration reform was promised and then put off a couple years, and then there was another speech this spring, but not much. I was wondering if you are seeing that movement in the Latino community also.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there is a parallel between the disillusionment of a lot of the young folks that were involved in the Obama campaign, that they were energized to get out and vote when he was first elected. And I see a lot of younger folks saying, not so much that I'm going to jump to this side, but I'm kind of like, there's a disillusionment there. I think that's happening to a degree in the Latino community. There's also great anger, so I think there's a lot of blame for both sides of the aisle on this thing, and I do feel like if we wanted to get this done, I mean, it's not, the solutions are out there, I believe. It just, the political games that we're playing keep this from happening today. And I think that's angering a lot of people. I think that's what's fueling the anger in many states, I believe. But I do think that the Hispanic community is a very volatile political community where it can go both ways. And I think that we're looking for leadership on this issue. And I don't believe that the president has provided as much leadership as he could. But I tell you, we're not finding that in the Republican Party either. So it's a really it's hard to tell people, you know what, especially dream kids when you're with them, hey, this may be 5-6 years before anything happens. I mean, that's a heartbreaking kind of reality to be faced with.
What do you say to opponents of the DREAM Act who cite their in opposition the stipulation we're not going to penalize states who provide in-state tuition to children of illegal immigrants? I mean, we live in a time where state governments are really strapped for cash, and how some might be angry or opposed to this concept of providing limited resources to children of illegal immigrants.
I think I saw in USA Today this morning that 12 states have taken on a kind of a state DREAM Act kind of a position where they do some variation of that. Well, I think it's a smart move on states' parts because I think they're investing in. I mean, think about you have kids that are really motivated to do well, and these kids are going to probably stay in those states and work and contribute and pay taxes, and they're not kids that are going to be delinquent. They're not kids that are going to be causing trouble. I mean, if anything, you're going to have the most grateful residents. And if they ever become citizens, then citizens. But I think it's short-sighted because again, like here's what happened in Illinois. The in-state tuition was allowed, but then there was a private group that included the governor that committed to raising scholarship money from private sources, not from public money. So there's been that kind of commitment from a lot of states, which I think really has been pretty amazing. And I just think it's a recognition of the great potential that's there.
Interesting to do an economic calculation in Illinois of, the money that was invested from scarce state coffers in tuition help for undocumented young people. And then if you could, kind of move out on that over time, if those people are likely to stay, they're not all going back, and what they end up paying in taxes and economic contributions and so on. The reason states invest in that is for the return. It's not just an altruistic investment. So wouldn't that hold true for the undocumented kids too, and so on? So there's a whole economics, but it's interesting in the debate you saw it, Perry, who's not coming across generally as Mr. Compassion, when he made the comment about defending his state's policy, you whole Tea Party constituency saying, is he our guy after all? So it clearly is a debate issue already in this campaign that bears upon what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Just one really, and I've told you, Jim, this before, but this is an unbelievable statistic. I live in a neighborhood, 100,000 people, mostly Mexican descent. Most of them are a lot of recent immigrants. We have the second highest sales tax income that comes to the city coffers, second to the Magnificent Mile.
Which is Magnificent Mile?
Which is Michigan Avenue, Barney's and Tiffany's and all those, huge stores like that. It's where the people go, come in and drop all their big bucks. We're second in the whole city in sales income to the city besides the Magnificent Mile. And this is this Mexican immigrant community. So, I mean, that folks in Illinois understand that. I mean, that is a tremendous benefit to the city.
Okay. Vale.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. I know there's been a lot of momentum on the DREAM Act because it's pretty much for the reason that it's pretty non-controversial. There's a lot of evidence that indicates it would be an economic boon to states that adopt it and the nation. But I think with the DREAM Act, and while I'm really excited about it in this university, including our president, are big supporters of the DREAM Act, I'm concerned that the momentum from the DREAM Act might die out after, if it is ever passed, and that hopes for addressing the greater problems of immigration to this country will be ignored because this one sort of flagship piece of legislation got passed that was relatively non-controversial. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or sort of what the agenda is beyond that, because I know that that's a big focus of the agenda, but other items out there.
Yeah. I think that's the classic debate for advocates for immigration reform. I'll just tell you personally, I came out on the side that said even though there's a risk of that I'm going to work for the DREAM Act pretty forthrightly and try to bring that to the forefront anytime I have an opportunity, because it is. I think it's really. I just cannot even believe that we would allow this to happen to these kids. and I see the wasted potential, and that in that kind of America, I don't understand how we, that's not what I'm really excited about, So I think that there is that danger, but I do believe that the rest of the problem still maintains, and we got to get there. Now, there is a piece of the legislation that's being proposed that if a kid gets their residency through the DREAM Act, that the parents of those kids would not ever be eligible. Okay, that's a piece of legislation that's being put out right now, which, if you look at the history of our U.S. immigration, that's always been the number one way for people to come in. You have a parent or a kid in the that's come in, and then you find a way to bring family along. So I think that's very mean-spirited and kind of short-sighted as well, and doesn't do well for families. But that's my position on that.
Yeah, Colton.
I guess I have also part of a question just more about legal immigration. What do you think? I guess a concern for me is we have a lot of people who come here. Adam mentioned in-state tuition, where you have legal immigrants coming here, they spend a period here under a visa. They don't have access to in-state tuition resources. What do you think needs to change with actual legal immigration policies to make sure that we don't have all these people coming into the country, attending our wonderful universities, and then taking that talent and that education that they received here and going back to their home countries and sort of investing it there as opposed to keeping them here?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that in a way, though, even that prospect, especially if it's folks that are coming from from very poor countries, that might even be a benefit in the long term to curbing immigration, illegal immigration here, because if they go back to their own countries and produce some type of economic benefit to their own country, because one thing, like, anybody here from Chicago or Minnesota or Detroit, okay, it is so cold, it is so different, it is so crazy. The fact that somebody would come from a southern hemisphere country to come and live in these kind of places, and they do it because it's the only way to survive. That's really unbelievable, okay? And I guess we adapt and all that, because I've been there for 20 years now, and I think I'm stupid, I guess, sometimes. But so I do think that's one issue, okay? I do think that even at that worst case, that there could be great benefit to the countries where they go back to. If we can find a way, and this is really the issue in my mind that is holding us up. The idea of the people that are here right now, the 15 million, the 12 million that are here, the pathway to citizenship, it goes against the real grain of, like, man, they broke the law. We got to so what do we, do we really ship them all out? Is that the answer? Could we even do it? But if we could figure that out, then coming up with a guest worker program that for those that can quantify, this is what we need on a regular basis, I think we can find a way to do that. I really do. That would be really fair, and that could allow for employers that do have very deep needs for labor that they're not going to find in this country. But I think a lot of immigrants don't want to come here. If there's a way to stay in their own country, and if there was, so I think part of the answer also is helping to develop economies in other parts of the world, and helping work on strategies like that. So it's there is a lure. There is that magnet to the north, or to this country, because of our incredible wealth. But I think with great wealth, there's also great responsibility.
What I've heard you say time and time again, and other of the strongest advocates on this, on change, is to start by saying this system is clearly broken, and it is a bipartisan break. In both sides, Democrat, Republican, are responsible for a system so broken that there are 12 to 15 million people here. And that's sort of a problem that has to be fixed. Those people are here. And so those who are against them being here, you might say, we all wish the system wouldn't have been broken, so they got here the way they got here. The way they got here is a horrible way of getting here. I mean, we both heard lots of stories. This is not the way you want to come to America. But the massive social project of apprehending and deporting 12 to 15 million people, I mean, none of the opponents of reform have ever laid out exactly how that would be done without uprooting the entire social fabrics and then all the folks who care about family and breaking up family. And there's not been a serious proposal for how to start over again. So this is a problem that both sides are responsible for. The way I always put it, there are two huge signs up at the border. There are two huge signs. One says no trespass. The other says help wanted. And they're both invisible signs, but they're huge signs that are in the minds of everyone who decides to break the law. I know it's illegal. I know I'm not supposed to do this. I know that I could be killed today, or I could lose members of my family today. But help wanted, I need that job. It's interesting, in the readings you had, the bishops actually make a statement that goes pretty far, further than some of these statements go, saying they're defending the right, the statement says, of a family if the circumstances in their home country are such that they're prevented from making a living, they can't make a living. The bishops say there's a right that family has to uproot and go somewhere else to make a living. So this is getting into real interesting territory here. So the system is broken. We got to start every conversation. This system is broken, and we're all responsible. And we got to fix this somehow. And just posturing about what might have happened, should have happened, isn't going to help us fix that system. So you got to come up with solutions somehow, and that's what you've been trying to do. Any other question here? Comment? Okay, for now, we're gonna now dig into your reflections in a few minutes. There's a lot of things that your reflections raised for me that I want to dig deeper with. But I want to thank you, Noel, for coming and for sharing your, as you can see from the people we're getting, we're not just bringing in people who can discuss the problem at 30,000 feet, but who've been on the ground of these problems and can tell you what it's like on the ground. And there's a practitioner integrity to the people that I'm bringing in here. And so they've actually been trying to fix things in the real world, as opposed to discussing solutions that always stay at the high levels of Harvard and Georgetown and don't hit the ground. So we're thankful for your bringing all that to us today. So let's give Noel our appreciation.